The title today, aptly titled A Local Council's Guide to EV Infrastructure, will be looking at the role that councils play in the deployment of electric vehicle charging, so from that initial strategy through to rollout. We'll look at the latest government support that's being made available from both a capital and, excitingly, a resource point of view. And then we'll hear from what are supposed to be 4 but 3 separate councils around the current and future projects that they're working on, really enable us to get under the skin from a borough council's perspective, and look at the different challenges they face and how they're approaching their strategy. Now, before I go in and set the scene, let me just introduce you to our amazing panellists that we have joining us today. So we have Sally Symington from Dacorum Borough Council, Tim Valentine from Swale Borough Council, Keith Martin from South Ribble Borough Council, and unfortunately sending our apologies is Jill Mosley, so we won't get that Gloucestershire County Council on Highways perspective today, which is a shame, but it will give our panellists a chance to shine a little bit more. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Before I kind of pick your brains today, just a little bit of housekeeping. I just want to explain how you guys can take advantage of some of the great functionality we have on offer. On the right-hand side of your screen, there'll be a Q&A tool. So if you pop your questions in there, they'll come straight through to me, and it just enables you to get involved and be part of the conversation today. As I mentioned, today's conversations are all around the relationships between public sector and electric vehicle, and there's no surprise that electric vehicles have formed a massive part of people's local net zero strategies. And obviously, where we have electric vehicles, we must also have electric vehicle charging capabilities. And obviously, we'll be looking at the role that the public sector play in this. In March of this year, the government announced a £1.6 billion funding package to boost EV charging across the UK. The government have emphasised a crucial role that local authorities play in meeting the country's transport decarbonising targets. And they've announced plans of public-facing electric vehicle charging points as 300,000 as a minimum by 2030. Now, you read various studies that have varying levels and criteria that we need to hit, but it's 300,000 as a minimum set by the UK government. And now within the strategy, there seems to be a kind of real focus around on-street. And there's no surprise, over 6 million households in the UK don't have driveways, don't have the luxury of being able to pull into their drive and plug into a lovely wall box. They're reliant on public-facing infrastructure, and that's obviously what councils play a big role. So what do we have to support that? We have the Levi funding package. So £500 million has been earmarked for additional local authority support, and they're coining it delivering high-quality charging infrastructure within that. And then if we break down that a little bit further, of the 500 million, we've got 450 million, which will be used for the local EV infrastructure. And then, local authorities will be able to leverage private funding investments in a bid to support the on-street installation of charge points and hubs. And then really excitingly, and I think what's going to make a really big difference is that extra £50 million, which is earmarked for resource, so the ability to train staff to work on charger planning and implementation. So that's really fantastic to be able to see, and I'm sure it'll make a massive difference for councils to have that additional support. And then we've seen probably a couple of weeks ago now the recent announcement of the Levi pilot. So we saw 9 councils being awarded a share of the £10 million. And I'm sure that'll be used to understand through the variety of projects and help shape criteria for the full fund to be introduced next year. So what will we be exploring with our panel today? So we'll be looking at how they are approaching on-street and charging infrastructure across their regions. We'll be looking at the barriers and the hurdles that exist. We'll hopefully be debunking some myths around on-street and their approaches. And then we'll also look at how the public sector plays that key piece of the jigsaw puzzle needed. And obviously at times it's complex, but we know that with opportunities and support out there, it can help to ease the challenge. So that's enough from me. So what I will do now is I will just open up to the panel. So just very, very quickly, if you wouldn't mind spending a couple of minutes, if we start with you, Sally, just introduce yourself, where you're from and where you're currently at your EV infrastructure journey, and then any sort of plans for future projects.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for inviting me along, and good morning, everyone. So I'm Sally Symington. I am here in my role as a borough councillor for Dacorum Borough Council in Hertfordshire. As it happens, I'm also a county councillor on Hertfordshire County Council, but I'm primarily here, as I said, in my role as Dacorum Borough Council. But it has given me some oversight as to the problems with, particularly with 2-tier authorities in rolling out EV charging points. So decorum, and probably a shame you started with me, Adam, but we're probably at the back of all of this. We're certainly the borough or district in Hertfordshire that has the fewest or the least number of publicly available charge points. We only have, according to the DFT figures in July, only 18 available across the whole of our borough. That's for 155,000 people. It represents just 12 per 100,000 of population, and we're only 25% of the average of the UK. So we are very much at the beginning of our journey, and we have a long way to go. Work has started. The council employed some consultants a year ago who came up with a figure that we needed, that we're estimating to have 30,000. We're going to have 30,000 electric vehicles in 2030, and that we will need 700 publicly available charge points at that point. The first step that the borough is making towards getting there is, and this is reasonably well advanced, and they are in negotiations with 2 suppliers to deliver this, is to deliver just over 100 charge points in borough-owned car parks. So that's across 26 car parks within the borough. And they, if all goes to plan and they sign the agreements with the suppliers, will be delivered in early 2023. The wider problem, Adam, as you've said, is, or certainly in decorum, we have, I think, just under 39% of homes do not have off-street parking. And of those 39%, that's around 25,000 homes, only 10% of them are within a 5-minute walk of a publicly available charge point. So to get this figure up, supplying just car parks isn't going to be sufficient. We are going to have to go down the route of putting them on the highways. And this is where Herts County Council come in. They have been very slow to recognise that this is the case. And only now, in September, are they basically talking to the borough and district councils about doing this. So some good news in that the borough is doing stuff in their own car parks, but quite behind the curve in terms of delivering it to people on street. So I hope that sort of hopefully sets the ground sufficiently as a starting point. I can add more, but I feel like that's probably enough for now.
That was perfect. Thank you, Sally. Keith, if we come to you next, again, where are you at your strategy? What are your future plans?
Okay, thanks, Adam. My name's Keith Martin. I'm the lead member for climate change at South Ribble Borough Council. I've been a councillor for this is my 12th year, so I get a little badge later on in the year. We came into the administration in 2019, and we declared a climate emergency in that same year. We then moved on to our climate emergency strategy in 2020. And the Climate Emergency Action Plan was approved in 2021. We've had quite a number of EV chargers put into private dwellings through planning, which we seem to be able to do. But we need to obviously identify where else we can put these within the council realms. We have 2 EVs, EV chargers at the Civic Centre, which looks at 4 places. And we successfully did a joint bid in 2019 with some other authorities on the OLEV scheme, which was successful, obviously. We successfully bid in 2022 for ORCS on-street residential charging sector for £122,000, which was good for us, which is give us funding for 19 EV chargers, so that's 38 spaces on council land. Unfortunately, we don't dictate what goes where. It has to go on council land, and it has to be this type of charge. And sometimes you sort of think, is it the right charger for the location? We're looking at another bid through the same funding for another 38 EVs on council-owned land. And as with Sally, we on-street parking would be sort of reliant on what is in the gift of the county council, Lancashire County Council, and I think they're a bit slow on the uptake with on-street parking, and they have had climate seminars. We've got another one coming up later on in the year, so unfortunately they're annual, so we have to wait a year and then probably wait another year for an answer, perhaps. I don't know. So that's where we are now.
I think it is sometimes difficult, isn't it, with a county council perspective? Where do you start? And I think, we'll touch on that a little bit later. So finally, Tim, same question, current situation, future plans, please.
Hi, well, so I'm Tim Valentine. I'm a councillor on Swale Borough Council. So like Keith, I was elected in 2019 and we came into office at that point. So there was a change in the administration in 2019. We inherited a very poor situation. There were no functional charges in Swale Borough Council area in 2019. They'd fitted a couple which hadn't been maintained and weren't working. And so we were an EV desert at that time. So our first approach was to put some charges into our own car parks. I think we've got 16 across our borough in our own car parks now. So we funded from an account which came from parking funds. So the money was from parking fines. It was earmarked for improvements to our car parks. So we used that funding to install our own chargers. And so one thing that's been quite important to us is to try and keep control of the chargers in our own car parks. So we've used the same supplier across the borough. So we have Pod Point in our car parks. And we've fitted 22 kilowatt chargers because I was a bit concerned that I'm not sure a 7 kilowatt charger in a sort of destination is going to have much longevity to it. I think as cars get bigger and the rapid chargers are faster, people may not be bothering to plug in for a 7 kilowatt charge for an hour or so. So where ours are currently all 22 kilowatt chargers. We've got funding from the Aux Funding that Keith mentioned. I must apologise if there's a noise in the background. We're having a delivery. I told them not before 12, but they've just turned up, I'm afraid. And they're in the room next to me. So apologies if that interrupts it. So we got the Aux Funding, and that's for another 18 chargers that are going into our car parks. So these really are, and these will be 7 kilowatt chargers, which was a condition of the funding. But again, they'll be Pod Point, so we'll have a consistent offer across the borough. These are all in our town centres. We're a rural borough, really, with 3 main quite distinct centres: Faversham, Sittingbourne, and Sheerness on the Isle of Sheppey. So that's where all these chargers. So our challenge is sort of really rolling out charging to the more rural areas and the smaller villages. There are some now have chargers in village hall car parks, which have been funded through a county council scheme. And what's really struck me is the change since 2019. We're only talking almost 3 years ago. But when we first mentioned this to, parish councils, rural parish councils, they kind of looked at each other and thought, well, what would we want with a car charger? Now they're all keen to get one in their own village hall. So I think that's probably where development is happening at the moment. I totally agree that the demand is going to come for on-street parking for people who don't have access to off-street parking. And we're limited in a similar way. Again, we're a borough council. Kent County Council are the Highways Authority. We've talked to them about fitting chargers to lampposts or using these e-gullies so that people can trail cables from their own house, which are quite popular with residents. That sort of concept seems quite popular. But KCC so far are saying no to all of that. So really we'll be looking for a change of policy from the county council.
Perfect. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, it's a shame that we haven't got Gloucestershire on here from a county council's perspective. But yeah, seems like similar frustrations. But again, we can dive into those a little bit later. So what I'll do is I'll just go into our first poll. So we've heard about your strategies and where you're at. I think it's just important to hear from the guys that are on the call as well, just to give them a chance to answer some of this. So the first poll is essentially looking at, what stage you're at as a council in your EV strategy, or the rollout of your current public EV infrastructure. There are 4 sort of answers on there, so we'll just leave that live for a few seconds, and then we will, I guess, have a look through the answers towards the end of the session. But it's interesting to see where you guys are currently at in your rollout of EV infrastructure there. So it looks like the vast majority, so around 50% of you guys have already installed charge points, and expansions are already planned, which is fantastic news. I think it's important we don't sit on our hands with this. Times are changing, correct? But I think we also need to learn by doing and implementing as well. We'll give that 10 more seconds, and then we'll close the poll. Okay, we'll just close that off now. Interestingly, 10% have no installations yet and no current plans to install charge points. So that's an interesting, I guess, insight to look at. It'd be interesting to understand as and why that there's no plans rather than no installations there. So if I very, very quickly, obviously just to expand on the point we've made, obviously the Levi Fund includes £50 million to help resource within councils. So Tim, if I start with you this time, I guess just the impact that's possibly going to have on future projects, and I guess how the council sort of plans to use some of that resource, or if it's even needed.
Okay. Well, as I understand it, and I have to be corrected if I'm wrong, but I understand this funding is going through the county council rather than the borough council, and so Kent again has some projects through the Levi funding, but none in our area at the moment. So it's not entirely clear to us how we're going to access funding through Levi yet.
Interesting.
So that's quite a short
answer,
isn't it?
Yeah, no.
If I'm being informed, I'd love to know.
Yeah, Sally, Keith, any comments on that? Is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, if I can come in, I firstly haven't heard of it, and I've read a lot of reports ahead of this meeting. I didn't make it clear, perhaps at the beginning, Adam, just for everyone who's listening. I'm in the opposition. I'm an opposition councillor both on Dacorum Borough Council and Herts County Council. So as I said, I've read all the reports and I've had conversations with officers. I haven't had this, as this has not come up in any of my conversations. One of the questions you asked us before was, is there a shortage of resource? I think councils are reluctant to admit there's a shortage of resource, but I think there probably is. So however this money filters through, whether it's the county or the borough, down to the boroughs and districts, it will be welcome. In terms of where I see a difficulty at the borough council level is that this sits, installing the electric vehicle charging points seems to sit between the procurement team, which is separate from the climate emergency team, and it isn't always completely joined up. I don't know if other people have that problem, but that's certainly what's happening at the borough. And then the other disconnect, obviously, is between the borough and district level and the county council. But I think funding will help. Additional resource will definitely help.
Yeah, it's interesting, I suppose, that information hasn't, I guess, spread as far and wide as possibly maybe someone like myself from a CPO perspective needs to understand what's going on, etc. But yeah, I think you're right. There is a kind of reluctance sometimes to pour more resource into projects and make them move faster and quicker. But if we just on that, so I guess the barriers really. So what I really want to understand is people need to have a position to start from. So they really need to understand, how many charge points they're going to need, what targets they need to set, what type of infrastructure they're going to be putting in. And Sally, you mentioned at the start that you had some consultants coming in to help you understand that. Would you be able to just talk a little bit more around that process and how that went and the results?
Yeah, sure. So a company, I don't know, I suppose, am I allowed to say their name? I don't know. Anyway, a set of consultants. Perhaps I won't say who they are, came in and basically did a I think sort of quite a high level basic survey, and I've given you some of the results of it already. So taking a graph of how many electric vehicles we're expecting in the borough by 2030. I appreciate there's lots of different curves, and this was done at the beginning of last year, so I think things have already moved on. And just to give you an idea of where the 30,000 sits in the sort of ultimate projection of how many they're anticipating by 2050, which would be 85,000. So 30,000 electric vehicles by 2030 isn't even halfway to where we were expecting it to be, and we still need 700 publicly available charge points, and we have barely 20. So, the task is enormous, and I'm really keen to see the borough and county council play a large part in this, not just in delivering it, but also helping that it's delivered in a coordinated way, so that stakeholders have a point of contact where they can actually talk to each other, so that we don't have the private sector just going off and putting them in various places that suit them because they're pressurized to, or it meets targets for their own internal. And I'm talking about supermarkets and other operators, pubs and so forth. I think this needs to be done holistically, and that will be my main call from all of this, is that the public sector and that we as councillors actually don't just hang everyone out, just leave everyone to sort it out for themselves, it, as I said, it is done holistically and we work together. And that would be what I really, really want to see from all of this.
Yeah, I think there is a real need, I guess, for private and public sector to work together. As you said, you don't want to be spending money putting charge points in where there's potential future investment. But then again, it's a chicken and egg, isn't it? I think you don't want to be waiting, a couple of years and nothing happens. Perfect. So Keith and Tim, I mean, have you had any, I guess, work or analysis done in terms of understanding the charge points needed across your boroughs? If we, I guess, start with Keith at the top.
I think the first sort of realisation was when we had a meeting at County Council. We were told that there were in the northwest, or in Lancashire, there was one charge at every 19 miles, which is it sounds all right if you're travelling to each of those points, but then when you look at sort of London, the figure for London was one every mile, or at least one every mile. So we sort of, we've not looked at how many numbers we have, because that will vary, because I mean we're just going by what we think we need. So we're just trying to make sure that houses have charge points built into them through planning, and that we try and make available as many as we can. I mean, we set our own plan out in March this year, before the funding was realised that we knew about, but we still haven't heard about the Levi funding as yet from County Council, as others have indicated. So and it's trying to maximise. I mean, we plan to put in 200 chargers. Overall, we have 50 publicly accessed chargers, privately and through the council. So we're sort of doing quite well getting there. The issue we have is obviously the third parties that are involved in putting that. We could say that we want it, but you have DNOs, which is the district network operators, the electricity board. They take so long to get things sorted out and things like that. I mean, we'd like to do all of our fleet, but I mean, even our bin wagons, but we told we would need £1 million just to install a new substation just for the power they would need to charge. And you sort of think, well, that sort of like just adds it all on. I mean, do people really care? So I think we've just sort of gone our own way, really, and looked at what we need in our area. We have concentrated at our community centres and also at our leisure centres. I mean, we were awarded a £5 million to decarbonise our leisure centres. So we're taking the gas out of every leisure centre and installing heat source pumps. And of course solar panels in each of those. There will be car chargers there, so it'll be one of the few chargers that actually doesn't use fossil fuels to charge an electric vehicle, which is some people find a little bit ironic, but we do need to move along on that, and this is the way we are at the moment. So our plan is to get as many as we can, and possibly charge, because we have primarily quite a lot of terrace housing, and I understand that is it the eye gullies you talked about? I can see issues with those. I mean, I personally work on the highways, so I sort of get to know what happens with this sort of stuff. And there was talk about induction loops, and anyone who's used one of these induction loops to charge your phone, it takes forever, and it never seems to charge right. So it uses a huge amount of energy as well. Plus, anyone with a pacemaker walking over might have a problem as well. So it's difficult, and it's a learning curve still. As I said, the battles are with third parties. We have our aspirations, and it's trying to get everyone to realise that. But we're involved with a lot of councils as well. There's 12, 13 of us in total, all want our own level of support from county council, and I don't think the funding's quite, well, it's never going to be enough, is it? So.
you raise a good point as well. I mean, you know, so looking at London seems to be the sort of hub and hotspot of every EV infrastructure innovation going on at the moment. I know we've got 5,500 charge points across London, so it's a massive amount. And I know within the latest strategy, there's a massive disparity between north and south as well. I think it's 1 in 30 in the south and 1 in 52 in the north, which is interesting. And so, Tim, if I can come to you, because you obviously talked about the fact that you're using 22 kilowatt chargers. I guess just the reasoning around that, and I guess any plans to look at differentiating speeds for different settings, I guess, because it's obviously important that we get the right charger in the right location. And I suppose the borough council might always be as easy to do so without access to highways.
Yeah. Yeah, so in our own car parks, we've got the 22 kilowatt chargers. I mean, it's interesting to see really how the specification for the onboard chargers on new cars is developing. I know the Renault Zoe can charge at 22 kilowatts. A lot of new cars are still coming out with 7 kilowatt chargers on board. Some of the more expensive ones have 11 kilowatt chargers. So that's one of those things where you're looking to see, you know, how the market develops. We've kind of backed it both ways with the 22 kilowatt chargers, but obviously if the cars don't have that capacity, that may have been a wasted resource we've got in there. I think it's too early to see how that's going to go yet. So as I say, we funded ours initially from our parking fines fund. We're not going to be able to pull that trick again. So that was sort of very much a one-off. That was when we came into office and we declared a climate emergency and we wanted to get something moving quickly on the car chargers. So we've had our first round of Aux funding, and those are now, we're in the process of getting that organised and getting those into car parks. We are making a second bid to Aux. And with that funding, you were talking before about analysis of where car chargers should be, putting the right charger in the right place. So we worked with the Energy Saving Trust, who had data on we used data on the number of households without off-street parking. And we had data on the number of EVs registered in the area. There were various other parameters as well. And so from that data, which the EST supplied to us, we were able to see which of our car parks would provide the best service to the most number of people. So if we're talking about charging overnight, so there we're talking about slow charging, and the 7 kilowatt is fine for that. And so obviously if you have a lower power for the chargers, you can get more of them in or have more outlets on the site. We certainly do find a problem is working with UK Power Networks and getting the survey data back and then getting the work done to connect. That does seem to have a huge delay on it. I guess everybody's trying to put car chargers in. So that's one of the things that slows us down. It's been interesting to see actually how the private sector have responded in our borough now. I think there's probably slightly more private sector chargers than there are council chargers in the borough now. So I think Tesco have put a bank of 8 in, and I think that's a mix of 22 kilowatt and 7 kilowatt. And they're free to use, which I have to say is quite popular amongst the EV community. Don't know how long they'll stay that way. And one thing, perhaps one of the achievements I'm most proud of is that when we came into office, there was already outline planning permission for a hotel on a site just outside Faversham. It's just off junction 6 of the M2. So the geography of it is if you came off the M2, you actually get to the hotel site before you get into the town. So it's literally about a minute from the motorway junction. And in granting the full planning permission, we were able to condition provision of 2 rapid chargers there, 2 50 kilowatt chargers. And I think they've got 6 slow chargers, 7 kilowatt chargers for their hotel guests. And it's good to see those slow chargers are the same pod point ones that we use in our car parks. So I'm an EV driver myself. And I mean, some of the, I always say, well, actually, I can charge on the drive, so I don't use car chargers locally here because I don't need to. I can charge at home. The rapid chargers I use a lot on when I make long journeys. I don't do it a great deal, but they're really critical. Being able to find them in the right place is always a frustration. And there's a huge array of different apps and ways of accessing them, which is always a frustration. Certainly, they're a pay and go, tapping a credit card is the way it's going, and it's good to see those rolling out more, though they more frequently are unreliable. Often it's the card reader or the Wi-Fi connection to it that doesn't work. So sometimes you can charge by an app when you can't charge with tapping a card. So I'm quite keen to try and sort of rationalize all that as much as possible. So that's why we like to keep control and have our own supplier of units across the borough. There is another scheme I could mention in our area, which I think is called Connected Kent. It's a supply and connected curb who are have an arrangement with KCC to put chargers in car parks. So I know Dover, for example, another district council in Kent, have gone with that. And I think they're having about 50 of these chargers put in. So we haven't gone with that scheme yet because then obviously we lose control. It's their own chargers. They set the tariff. They're responsible for the maintenance. And so we don't have control over those in our car parks. But so that's where we are at the moment.
Thanks, Tim. It's really in depth. And I think you're right. There was obviously some issues raised around possible relationships with DNOs and costings and timeframes and stuff, which we can get into a little bit later on. Obviously, you're trying to battle the on-street charging mainly through car parks, obviously not having access or being the Highways Authority. So I think if I just bring a poll in now, just to understand, I guess, other councillors' perspectives, hopefully we've got some county councils on this, and just understand whether or not on-street charging forms a part of it or whether it is a big part of their strategy going forward. Okay, we've got a little bit of unsure going on, which is probably no surprise, I think, with the need to gel with the highways authorities from borough councils and district councils' perspectives. We're only sat at 20% currently, sitting at no, which is good because I think you guys have already highlighted the need to support the residents that don't have the luxury that Tim has of being able to pull up into their driveway and plug their electric vehicle in. So it's great that we're seeing 64% have said yes. If we give that another 15 seconds, and then we'll end that poll and share the results at the end. Okay, perfect. So we're sitting at about 50-50. So 54% have said yes, and then we have 31% no and 15% unsure. So they're really interesting results there. And like I said, we'll share those at the end. So just moving on quickly, you, Tim, have talked about the fact that you've gone with PodPoint and you've mentioned a few others. How important is it that you choose the right provider? And what sort of things are you looking at? What's the criteria from a council's perspective, that makes you go, these are the guys we want to be going with?
Okay, well, the short practical answer to your question is that there was already a framework agreement in place with PodPoint. So we had some experience of them, and we could go with that framework agreement for installing them. They do seem, actually, I know the chargers in our car park in the town centre, we've got 4 bays there, and they all went down at one point with a faulty earth. And so, people were saying to me, oh, when are they going to get fixed? And I was trying to manage expectations. But I must admit, PodPoint exceeded my expectations, and they got them up within a couple of days. So I was quite impressed by that. So our experience has been good so far. I mean, I don't have a wide experience of work as a councillor working with other suppliers. Maybe others do.
Sally, we come to you on that. I guess also just criteria that you're looking for, really. Have you set any sort of KPIs or anything with the charge point operators you have or are planning to have?
I can't answer specifically about the KPIs. I can give you a little bit of background to who we, to a bad experience that Decorum's had. So basically, initially Decorum inherited or was handed over the existing charge points in the borough from Herts County Council, and the operator was BP Pulse. And a lot of these were faulty, and they've had really bad maintenance problems, and some of them were out, for 6 months before they were fixed. So the council, so that's been a big problem, basically. So basically, reliability is a key criteria sort of moving forward. And in fact, efforts to negotiate that particular supplier rolling out basically fell on stony ground, and I think the reliability and customer service was not adequate. So now they are looking. The Decorum is very close to reaching an agreement, as I said, with a couple of suppliers, and it is based on what other basically they are using the experience of other councils, and so in terms of performance and reliability and guaranteed, well, obviously nobody can guarantee things, but knowing that there is a history of reliability and service, and those are key things. And I think the other key thing for Decorum is that it is going to be is to not have to basically go to tender. They don't want to fund it themselves, so they want an operator who will fund it, and the rest of the funding will come from Aux grants when they've got the agreements in place. So as I said, the council don't want to put any public money into it, so it has to be self-funding. And that this does mean, and I think Tim's already alluded to this, as in the connected curb example, that you do lose control of the charging, but equally, and I'm not defending this, but the administration doesn't want to put any public money into it. So that's the route that Decorum is going down.
Perfect. I think obviously we all understand that sometimes things go wrong, but I think, that's a massive barrier, isn't it? Charge points being down, the reliability levels have to be really, really high for the transition across. Keith, I guess just from your experience, same sort of subject really, charge points, how are you selecting them? How are you deciding who to go with?
Well, I mean, currently the procurement is on a case-by-case system at the moment. And we do hope to sort of move it into sort of more of the corporate realm and become part of the framework. And of course, we are relying on sort of third-party charges as well. So that's sort of out of our hands. It's difficult to sort of like put a finger on what we actually need, because as Tim alluded to, a dodgy earth took down some of his charges, and I know sort of for a fact that some of the sort of like the what they call the earth loop impedance, so that the earth that the substrate that the DNO provides sometimes may not be suitable for, especially in some of the rural areas where you're relying on overheads, which is another issue. So it's sort of up in the air. We've sort of funded our own initially, and we paid for people to charge at the civic centre and some of the other areas. So we're sort of moving on from there, really. So once we get the framework in place and we know where we're going, and we get the funding, because we still need to install another 70 odd chargers initially by summer next year. So that will probably depend on that and who will go with that. And we may have hopefully we may not have an administration change in May, but I mean, and that could set a different set of parameters, but we'll have to see how we go with that.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, you sort of highlighted a few issues there, like you said, the earthing. It's difficult, isn't it? Because obviously we're in quite a rapidly moving market, and I think there's charge point operators coming into the market all the time. So I think it is really important that you have someone with a proven track record that you go through with. Like Tim said, point seemed to work in his area. So obviously, speaking from my perspective as a CPO, the question we normally get asked the most, and you guys have touched on a little bit, is around the procurement routes and how do you get this stuff through procurement and actually installed. I don't know who has the most experience of going through procurement, be it frameworks or DPSs. Who wants to start? I guess just a little bit of advice for the guys listening as to how you've gone through that process and managed to install charge points.
Well, I'm
Sally,
probably the least well qualified. As I've sort of said what's happened insofar as we inherited some from Herts County Council, which we took over, and they, as I said, had an existing operator. We still have those, but that's not what completely contrary to Tim, where he was very happy with one he was, they were using. We weren't happy at Decorum, so we are looking to move to someone else. And in terms of as I said, it's very close to concluding who it is. And yeah, sorry, I've actually forgotten exactly why I had said it. I was least well qualified to answer this. The question was, what was the point about choosing the operator?
It's just just sort of I guess preferred frameworks or DPSs that you guys are looking at using or have used.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, sorry. So that was it. So basically, as I said, the council have definitely gone down the route, which is to use the framework of another council and to piggyback on the back of that. And I think that's part of it. But that also it gets around some of the procurement problems, and it also it evidences that those people are delivering. Those two suppliers are delivering for someone else and have a track record. But yes, they very much didn't want to go to full procurement. They wanted to be able to piggyback, as I said, on the back of what other councils are doing.
Perfect. Tim or Keith, I guess anything to add to that?
I mean, if I quickly, I mean, we have currently sort of gone into sort of bringing things back into house, and obviously it reduces that overhead of called profit and shareholders. Not that there's anything wholly wrong with that. So I think it'd be in an ideal world, I'd like to sort of have the council be able to run their own charges, and I think and that gives us the opportunity to sort of like perhaps give people a little bit more for their money, so to speak, without the profit overhead side of it. Because I mean, or if we do make a profit, it should go back into more EV charges. So that may be a possibility. Up in the air at the moment, sort of, as I say, we're at the end of heading towards the end of our 4-year terms. I mean, promises are easy made, but we just need to make sure that we're right in what we do. And I mean, so far the work we've done so far has helped and worked. So we provided free charges for people in locations, which is useful. Taxis. We have not an issue with the taxi, but the taxi companies, I mean, the grants that are available are not enough really to sort of encourage people to ditch their sort of 4 or 5-year-old car. Because I think cars we keep for 7 years, we license up to. So, I mean, I think it's a £3,000 grant. When you're looking at new cars, even second hand, you're looking at £10,000-12,000. So it's still it's a sort of slow burning candle, that one. We'd like to get our taxi sort of fleet up to scratch with that, but there's not enough charges for them, so we would have to look at doing that for them. Hopefully the taxi forum would help as well with suggestions. So I think at the moment we'll carry on funding them ourselves until we get the framework sorted out. And I saw when we start ordering on bulk, we might have to sort of move away from that and hopefully bring it in house. But that's an aspiration rather than a realization at the moment. So.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear, isn't it, the different approaches that Keith you're happy to fully fund, and obviously there's other councils that don't want to put any funding into it. And I think both are viable opportunities and options. If I just wrap up sort of final question, and then what we'll do is we'll take some questions from the audience here. I think what we obviously want to do, and you guys have spoken about it earlier, is the ability to kind of share learnings. We don't really want to be going over the same mistakes again, and it's important that councils do link in with each other and understand what's happened. If there's kind of one piece of advice or one thing that you would, I guess, want to share, what would that be? And if we start with you, Tim.
Wow. Well, let me go back to having control of our own charges. And another very important thing that I haven't mentioned so far that flows out of this is that in our climate emergency declaration, we said we wanted to protect the more vulnerable members of the community from the costs of anything we were doing. And so having our own charges means we can set our own tariff, which you don't get with a commercial supplier. So our tariffs at the moment are 25 pence, which I think is about the lowest you can find on the market. How long that will last, it's very hard to say with the way energy prices are going. But it does give us that control to try and keep the price as low as possible. So I suppose, having control of your own charges is probably one of our learning points, which I think so far has proved right. I think when we're rolling out to on-street park charging, that's probably not going to be possible.
Perfect. Keith, one piece of advice?
I think the main advice to get numbers, I suppose, is use the planning process. Use it as often as you can. They're not overly. I mean, it's hard work getting sort of planning policies in place, and they can take a long time. But developers seem to have gone with this EV thing. It must be worth their while, because they don't seem to go with solar panels so well, which could help. We do have a policy, a provision of electric vehicle charging points for developments, which is on our website, South Ribble. So there's some information there. But I think that's the way forward is planning at the moment. So anything that's new, get charges put in, and proper bays to put them in with, and try and sort of like keep a tag on them, so you people are not being, because you hear a lot of people sort of getting charged quite a lot of money for a short charge, and it sort of devalues the reason why, part of the reason why, because you're getting it because it's cheaper to run to some degree, and if you're getting it paying through the nose for that, and you're paying more for it than you would do with petrol and diesel, then that would be the delay with it. So the more charges you can get in, the better they are, and the cheaper they are to operate and to supply at the supply point, then the better overall.
Perfect. Thank you, Keith. And then Sally, finally.
Well, thank you. It's been really interesting to hear everyone's points of view, and the different ways that we're all coming at this. I asked one of the key officers, the procurement officers at Decorum, this question. He struggled to come up with something very positive. His piece of advice was from the Decorum point of view, and I would endorse this, is that the county council, that the highways, the highways authority needs to be on board with what's going on, and I think that the borough and districts have struggled to push through what they want to deliver, because however many charge points they put in their car parks, the car parks are all in town centre locations, and lots of we have. Other people talked about their areas, so we have one very large town, Hemel Hempstead, but we also have two other kind of two other quite large towns, Berkhamsted and Tring, which are kind of historic market towns and have quite large areas of terraced housing. So even though they're communities, people can't, they can't have, there's no off-street parking. So we need basically to be able to access the highways to deliver this. And one of the other things which we haven't talked about at all, but is the changing town centre use, which affects how much people are going to want to invest in these town centre car parks. Because we have found, against all predictions, well, not against expectations, not predictions, that actually car park use has not bounced back after COVID. So we're finding people are not driving back into the town centres. And this is going to affect those models for putting the charging points in. So basically, first thing is make sure that this is, and it comes back to my point about it being holistic. It needs to include on-street, off-street. We need to plan it much more centrally, in my opinion. That would be my advice. It needs to be done in a coordinated way and not left just to individuals, to market forces to deliver this, because it will not be delivered in a sensible way, and there will be huge losses to some and huge gains for others, and the costs to the consumer will consequently be more. So I guess, yeah, as I said, the officers want the boroughs and the county councils to work together, and I would like to see everybody brought into a discussion about how we deliver this for the best for people, so that we don't have wastage because things are put in the wrong place. So that would be kind of my advice and my plea. I've got parish councils who want to be involved, who are struggling on their own to connect into it all. As I said, I think we all need to be working together, and events like this are great. So I really welcome the opportunity to hear all the rest of you. And Adam, thank you for, chairing us through all this. I know we're going to take some questions, but that's my advice: is please, can we all work together?
I couldn't agree more. I think that's a fantastic sort of piece to finish on. If I just sort of move across to a few questions now, and I guess, Sally, just to touch on that, there's a question in here as to why the county councils have been so slow in deploying the on-street charging. It might be a tough one to ask or to answer. I guess maybe more so, how are you working with them, or I guess what steps have been taken to make sure that sort of inclusivity and connected way of working happens?
Are you asking me, Adam?
Please, I guess the only county council experience, I suppose.
Oh, okay. So, okay. Well, it's hard to answer this question without it being slightly political, because ultimately this is a political decision about how public money is spent, and people's visions for how things roll out. As I said, I explained earlier, I'm an opposition councillor both at the county council and at the borough. So, my role in all this is only soft power. Is to try and persuade the administrations to do the things that I would like. And on behalf of residents, I have so many residents saying I would buy an electric vehicle if I knew I could charge it easily. So we do need a way forward through all this. I can't honestly tell you exactly why they have been very reluctant. It seems to me to be, I guess there are issues about losing control. There are issues about, I guess, on-street parking. We haven't talked about this, but, the homeowners who expect to be able to park outside their house, who are going to lose that right. So, it being sort of politically unpopular in local areas. There are issues about street width, where the lamppost is vis-a-vis the parking. There are a number of obstacles to overcome, but I guess in the case of Herts County Council, they've been happy to sit back and watch others take the lead. And in fairness to the administration, they are now much more engaged in rolling forward on-street parking, and are reaching out to the district. So if you want me to leave on a positive note, the positive note is I think we're getting there, and I would like to play a part in making sure that's an active dialogue between those two tiers.
Perfect. Keith, Tim, anything to add? I guess any relationships or conversations, how much influence you guys have really with those sort of on-street decisions?
I don't think we have much at the moment. We'll ask. I mean, obviously through planning we can do that, but that's generally private property. But we have sort of got the county council to plant trees for us sort of through planning. So there may be avenues through there. I mean, we don't really want to force people into doing stuff. Really, we'd like them to sort of just be on board and roll with us. As I say, the networks are. The private networks and some of the electricity networks need addressing in some areas, but I think that they have slowly moved towards it. I mean, we've had our first sort of environment summit, and we're trying to engage parish and town councils, because I think they're very important with that, because I mean, if you can, you'll get a swell of opinion from them, and the chances are it will be positive. And I agree with Sally that it will be a change in habits and the way people think about parking, and the way they think they have the right to park outside their house. And sometimes, and there are some external factors with that. Obviously, some crime issues and things like that could be an issue for why people don't want to do that. So there's a lot of people involved in making this work, and I think we all need to move together with this. We're getting there, we're moving, which is better than sort of going backwards or standing still. So hopefully someone from my council will be looking at this and thinking, yeah, perhaps we should now. And I think the lamppost idea is good, though it could be prohibitive for some areas. So, but it's all good. We're moving. That's the main thing.
I think you're right, Keith. I think, we've all touched on it. It needs to be a portfolio approach. There's certain charges that work better in certain areas and regions, and I think it's not just a case of we'll just do one. It needs to be, we'll do them all, and support residents and people across the regions as much as we can. Tim, anything to add to that, or shall I take another question?
Yeah, well, I had a conversation the other day with a supplier of on-street charging. So they're talking about coming along, fitting whole streets, putting chargers on every lamppost. They sort of say it will only take an hour or something to fit a charger to a lamppost, not marking out bays. I think that's one thing we've been very wary of. If we didn't want to mark out an EV bay on a street of a Victorian terrace where there's intense pressure for parking, and then nobody's using it because nobody's got an EV because they couldn't charge it before, so it's that sort of chicken and egg problem of how do you match demand to supply. But and the commercial chargers were saying, we can do all this at no cost to the council, and in fact you'll get an income from it. The rub though, of course, you won't get charging at 25p a unit out of those chargers. So I guess it always gets paid for somehow. But you pay for the convenience in the charging world. There's a couple of other points. I don't know if I could mention this. Just we converted our council fleet to EV. So we've got another 8 chargers, which I didn't mention. And all our little diesel vans are now little electric vans. And so we kind of try and lead the change by that. And the other point I would make, I don't think we decarbonise transport entirely by switching petrol and diesel cars to EVs. And one thing I've done in Faversham, which is a small market town similar to the one Sally was describing, we've introduced a car club to that, and that has been much more successful than I anticipated. I'm very pleased to say, and I think it's probably going to get expanded fairly soon. And we only came in this summer, so the idea is people who only need a car occasionally can give up their car, free up some of the space on the roads, and you've got easy and reasonable access to a car available nearby.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it comes back to the point that was raised earlier in terms of everyone working together. We have decarbonising targets. It needs to be both, converting to electric vehicles and modal shift. And I think you're right, just touching on the parking aspect as well. If we can electrify more of the street, it does, initially get around that parking issue or the need to have to park directly outside your house to access a charge point. We've got a couple of minutes left before the session ends. So any questions that haven't been answered, what I will do is I'll make sure that the panelists get a copy of them and they're able to respond directly to you guys. So they will be answered. Apologies, always seems to be the case with these online sessions that you never have enough time. To help us shape the future sessions, because we don't want to just assume what you guys would like to learn about, I've got a final poll, which essentially is just understanding what would be beneficial from a council's perspective to learn about in future sessions. So if I just start that now, we'll let it run for a couple of minutes, and then we'll say thank you to the panelists, and then we'll let you guys get on with your days. I'm sure you'll agree it's been a fantastic session. It's been really good to hear from different perspectives. And yeah, Sally, thank you for providing what you can on the county council's perspective, because I think that was the missing piece of this puzzle here. So yeah, if we give it a few more seconds, I will share the results as they come in, and we can sort of see, I guess, what is the approach and what should we be focusing on going forward. So there seems to be quite a need of what, I guess, it's something we've discussed is that whole start to finish process from a council's perspective, because there's so many varying opinions and options and CPOs that tell you different things that are right and wrong. That it would be good to hear from a council from start to finish of what they've done. How did they decide what they needed? How did they procure it? How did they install it? How has that gone? Residential feedback, etc. So that seems to be coming out with 40% at the moment. So I think that might be what we focus on next. But I'll just end that poll. I'll hide those results. And I just want to say a massive thank you, guys, for joining me today on the webinar. You've been absolutely fantastic. I'm sure the audience will agree. And like I said, the questions that haven't been answered, we will make sure they get answered. But thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. And guys in the audience, thank you as well. And enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Adam.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.